I'm having all the candidates invited next month in October. That'll be real candidates night. So we're not going to let everybody talk tonight, if y'all don't mind that. Kristen Cobb is running for Klein ISD trustee. Carmen Montiel is running for CD 18, Congressional District. And her representative is here, right over here, so you can talk to him. And, Brody Scott is here for his dad, Kyle Scott, and Kyle will be here and is going to get to speak a little bit because he's got a hard run against a Democrat candidate for treasurer of Harris County, and that kind of goes with the money talk tonight. George Brian Vacris, he's one of ours, and he's running for State Senate District 15. Gardner Eastland. Oh, Gardner, I didn't see you come in. Where's Gardner Eastland? Over here. Okay, welcome. And he's running for judge of the 311th. So I hope all of you will come back next week and get a longer time to talk. And Mark Ramsey is running for the North Harris County R Water Authority. I don't know what the R, Regional Water Authority, number 4. So. Okay. And Jeff McGeorge was here. He is here for Carmen. That's right. Thank you. And Captain Jonathan Zietzman, where are you, Jonathan? Is here. We're so honored to have you again. He's here representing Constable Mark Herman and his whole team of wonderful constables. And we're just always glad to have you here. And Mark may get to be here a little bit later. So as far as other guests, no one signed in. I know I have a lot of guests. I'm going to say if you're a guest, maybe a first or second time and don't mind standing up and introducing yourself, we'd love for you to. So I'll start over here and let's just stand up if you're a guest and tell us who you are and who brought you.
I'm Bryce Ritson, work for Gardner Eastland.
Okay, glad to have you. He's with Gardner Eastland, so we'll probably be seeing you both again. Okay. I'm moving on through here. Anybody else? More guests? Okay, is Danny going to stand up and be a guest?
Takes a minute. Hi, Dan Shea here. I'm a veteran and a member of the Texas Tea Party, not as long back as 1993, but it's been a while.
Welcome. We're glad to have you come with Mary Shea. Okay, next. Raise your hand. Okay, over here. Justin, thank you.
I'm Galen Keys. I'm a teacher in Klein ISD at the disciplinary campus. They call it the Annex, High School Special Ed English. And I got tricked into coming tonight. I was running an errand, and Kristen texted me and said, Donna wants to know if you're coming to the Texas teacher meeting tonight. And I'm like, Texas teacher, I got to be there. I got to go right now, though. I don't have time to go home and change or anything. And so here I am, and I walked in and asked Lee, the teacher's night, right? She goes, no, it's just tea party. Oh. Kristen.
We are so glad to have you. Come anytime.
She says it's a typo, but I haven't decided yet.
We try everything. Okay, and Tara, you brought a guest.
Hello. Russ is one of my church friends.
Okay, thank you for bringing him. And Tara is a longtime friend of Texas Tea Party. We're glad to see you here again, too. Anybody else? We forget to honor and introduce and honor 2 or 3 people that are almost always here, and we couldn't operate without them, and that's our AV guy, David Flower. John Arthur Fiala. And Justin Ontiveros. And his parents came to see if he really is working all this out. And we're longtime friends, so we're all so proud of John and Justin particularly, because I taught them when they were 3 years old in Sunday school. So, anyway, okay. So what's next? Oh, Tom Kimball. Yes, Tom Kimball came and introduced himself to me tonight because we're longtime Facebook and email friends. Tom, where are you?
Over here in the sound system.
Okay. Whoops. I can't see. Okay, I see you now. Welcome. We're glad to have you. You ready?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. A little adjustment. Okay, and now we're going to have our committee reports. And first up is Kristen Cobb, membership.
Hello, everyone. So while we're trying to get a conservative that's willing to stand up for our children on the board, I'm still also serving as the VP of membership here. And we have a very special event coming up, so if you would please mark your calendar. This is for those of you that would like to become more involved in Texas Tea. Maybe you haven't volunteered with us. Maybe you want to serve in a board role, or maybe you want to help us plan some events or our Christmas party. We're having a lunch, okay, on the 29th at 11:30 a.m. And where was I? And we're going to have it at Spring Creek Barbecue. But Norma, that's the one that's off 249. Is that right? Yes, right at Spring Cypress and 249. So mark your calendars. That is the 29th of this month at 11:30 a.m. if you'd like to come volunteer with us some more. And we really need you guys to get involved. And you need to be a member to come and serve in these roles. So if you have not signed up with us or you're not current, please come see me. And I need you to see me quickly because my daughters are over there skating with their friends over at Champion Skate Park and some of our Republican volunteers. And I need to pick them up. And so that means I need to leave here by 8:45. Okay?
Okay, thank you so much. And now Kathy Turner is going to talk about our Christmas party. And I know you're going to love it.
Don't you love Kristen? I tell you what, we're excited about the Christmas party this year because we're going to do something that's like old-time American. We are going to have a Christmas party in a home, and we invite you all for that good feeling about our heritage and what America is to us and the kind of freedoms that we grew up with to celebrate the birth of Christ. So that's going to be at Kristen Cobb's house. Again, thrilled to have it at Kristen's house this year. It'll be on December 13th. So that's the big event that we have coming up. We've got some other things on the calendar to follow, but Merry Christmas. Get ready for Kristen's. Thanks.
Okay. And now our legislative with Lexi Swirsky.
Yes, just a reminder, the last day to register to vote in the November election is October 11th, and early voting starts October 24th. So I have been going down to almost every meeting at Harris County Commissioner's Court, and they've had extra meetings. And 2 weeks ago when I was there, I was wondering what is going on, because Adrian Garcia usually puts up this Mr. Nice Guy, talks about how he used to be the sheriff, and makes all over the law enforcement officers like he really supports them. And he was giving the representative from the deputies union a very hard time because the guy was sharp and principled and would not back down and admit that and Garcia wanted him to say they had not been defunded, and he was not going for that. And Garcia was getting quite hostile as the conversation went on, and the speaker he was interviewing. So then later that day, I saw the letter that the commissioners had received the night before, and Glenn Hegar will talk about that. So I'm like, oh, okay, now I get it. And we just have a fight with the news media to get this all understood. So I went last Wednesday. They've had a lot of extra meetings lately. And a friend of mine texted me and said, oh, I saw you on the 5 o'clock news. It was just a photo of me testifying. And I didn't know that you and Lena agreed on something. I'm like, no, we don't agree on anything. What are you talking about? And she had, after the hearing was over, she had had a long impromptu press conference and apparently had done a lot of lies. And that's what they played on most of the news channels, except Channel 26. So, yeah. So anyway, I'm excited to hear what Glenn Hegar has to say because that would be wonderful. We need to keep our law enforcement fully funded and even more money. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexi. Deanne? Is Deanne here? Deanne LaRue? She's here. Okay. She's on her way.
While we're waiting for her, I want to say one thing.
Yes, Norma's going to say a word.
Okay. I forgot to mention someone that I'm representing also is Valerie Swanson, my state rep, but her mother wants to say something too, and everybody knows her mom, Pat Hansen, and she brought a guest tonight, so I'll let her speak.
All right. I just didn't move fast enough a while ago. I have a guest tonight, Lois Brink.
I think they are.
And she brought me in her car. And so I'm grateful to be here and grateful to her.
And she's representing Valerie too. Okay. Is Deanne here or has she left? She may have had to leave. Is she? Okay. Does anyone see Deanne and Chris? Oh, they're eating dinner in the other room. Okay.
Maybe she's coming now.
I'm not sure. Yeah. Anyway. Okay, so you can give her PAC report and tell about that, and we'll go on to that.
Okay, I will give her a brief PAC report, and that is that our PAC, Political Action Committee, is appointed by the president and will be planning and making donations to candidates. Okay, October 11th. Right now, we're going to have nominations for our nominating committee, and we need at least 5. Thank you. 3 board members and 2 non-board members. And so we need to have people nominated to be elected to be on our nominating committee. Now, we're going to open up the nominations right now, and whoever would like to nominate somebody to be on the nominating committee, please raise your hand. Yes?
I'd like to nominate Gail Stannard.
Okay, Gail Stannard. Very good. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Yes.
I nominate Kristen Cobb.
Kristen Cobb. Okay, and she's a board member. Anybody else? Kathy?
I nominate Norma Jeter.
Norma Jeter. Okay, anybody else? Lexi? Benita Odom. Okay. Anybody else? Kristen? Kristen Cobb, did you have a nomination? Yes. Kathy. Okay. Nominating Kathy. All right. Very good. Kathy Turner. All right. Any more nominations? That is 5. Yes. Who is the next nominee? You sure? Would you like to nominate somebody? Pardon me?
How many is that?
It's 5, I think. Is that 5?
Gail and Benita for the non-board.
Mm-hmm.
Norma and Kathy and Kristen. Yes.
Norma, Kathy, and Kristen. Anybody else want to nominate anybody? Okay, hearing no further nominations, the nominations are closed. All in favor of this slate for the nominating committee, say aye. All opposed? Okay, it's passed. Thank you very much. All right, moving right along. Norma Jeter, it's time for you to introduce our guests. Thank you.
Is Kyle Scott here yet? Okay, I had him first, but he had another meeting, so he'll be a little later. So we will go ahead with our main speaker, and that is Glenn Hegar. And I have a great story to tell about that because I heard him speak 5 months ago at Northwest Forest Republican Women's Club and said, "Oh, we've got to have you at Texas Tea Party," and it's been a long time since he's spoken for us. And so we got together with Kim, his assistant, and it was 5 months till he could speak. And then we had to move it to the first Tuesday, so we really wanted him, but someone knew there was going to be something really special going on right now that Glenn's involved in. So someone said, "Norma, you have a real coup for a speaker." And so God knew what the timing. So I will tell you a little bit about him, not very much because I've sent out the bio with all the information on him. It's just that he is our Texas Chief Financial Officer, the state's treasurer, check writer, tax collector, procurement officer, and revenue estimator. And he has a Texas broadband plan that he is traveling and talking about. This is what really got to me. He is the CFO of the world's ninth largest economy is Texas. He is charged with maintaining the state's fiscal health, and he has served in both the Texas House and the Senate and gained a reputation for customer service, transparency in government, and conservative fiscal management. He's an A&M graduate in 1993 in St. Mary's University, where he earned a Master of Arts and his law degree. At the University of Arkansas, he earned his Master's of Law, and I had 2 grandsons go there. He is a 6th-generation Texan who grew up farming land that has been in his family since the mid-1800s. And when not in Austin or traveling the state, he lives in Katy with his wife, Dara, and his now teenage children, Claire, Julia, and Jonna. And he says he asked for your prayers, as his oldest is now driving a car. So, Glenn, we're so honored to have you here. So, welcome.
Thank you, Norma. I appreciate that. And yes, those of you who did not hear, I will restate of the most important part of my bio that anyone could hear whatsoever. Yes, keep me in your prayers because you heard right. I have a daughter who is 17. I've got a daughter that's 14. And I've got a son that's 14. And so a few years ago, I was fortunate enough that I was decided to do driver's education with the oldest daughter, and believe it or not, that worked out pretty good. So she's not had any tickets and she's not had any wrecks as of today. So we're doing good. And the twins, just last night we had the discussion that now they're 14, they have to start the course portion of it because when they turn 15 next year in March, then Dad has double duty with 2 more kids to learn how to drive. So I will tell you in part, yes, God does work in mysterious ways. We are convinced and reminded of that quite frequently. Those of you that may not know, when Norman's talking about, I grew up in a small farming community. You go down Highway 290 out of Houston. You go through a community called Hockley. You blink, you miss it. You do not blink. You keep your eyes open. You see Hegar Road. It's a coincidence. That's us. We have been out there since the mid-1800s, a very, very long time. So it's been a great area to grow up in, to raise my children in, of our 3 kids. Not far from there is Waller, which is where my grandfather, my mom's side, Lowell Thompson, was a Baptist preacher. And where I'm going is, a lot of times when I talk about my teens, I remember, as some of the sermons, and one of them talks about, this inner struggle we have. We all have an old sin nature, and so, and then fast forwarding at some point when we had our oldest daughter, Claire, our true story, I was holding her, I was looking at her, she was just born, and I looked at her and I thought, like most new parents, she's such an angel. Then they became teenagers. And that's when I flashed back that, yes, there's a demon in all of us, and it comes out in the teen years. So keep me in your prayers. Don't post that on the internet. I don't need my kids seeing it. They look at everything and troll their father of what's going on. Julia will report tonight. I heard you were talking about us in your speech. Is it true what you said? So anyway, yes, it's comical. Anything that I say, they are watching constantly. But it's good to be with you. Thank you for the introduction. Yes, I serve as Controller of Public Accounts, and just short, real quick, and then I'll talk about several different issues. That means that I've got 3,000 employees. When I got into this role, when I first took the oath of office, got sworn into office, Texas at that time was the 12th largest economy in the entire world. Every morning when you wake up, it is hard to imagine. There's another 1,000 to 1,200 people that call Texas home every single day. Half of those people are natural growth, births minus deaths, another half of those that move here. I frequently get asked the question is, why do people want to move to Texas? Why are people moving to Texas? And the simple answer is the same reason that my family moved out to Hockley, Texas in the 1840s was why? For an economic opportunity. People see this state as an economic opportunity. They want to be a place where they can raise their children, raise their family, provide for their family, and provide for future generations. And, you know, myself, several years ago, we had an economic downturn that was self-induced in part, government shutting down businesses. I was on a conference call with the other 49 treasurers. As you heard, I run the Treasury is one of the things. Think about this. In your state budget, whether that is federal money that we pay in taxes and comes back to D.C., or whether it's your state portion of the budget, those that we as taxpayers pay, your state budget right now, and you have to hold on to your seats, is an astonishing $126 billion a year. So that means me as the CFO, Chief Financial Officer, running the state treasury, if I sit at my desk 40 hours a week, I work more than 40, but just to make a point, if I sit at my desk and I did nothing else, all I did was sign 14 million so-called treasury warrants, essentially means payments on behalf of the state of Texas, and I literally tried to cram those in a 52-a-year work week, 40 hours a week, worked 5 days a week, didn't take off any days whatsoever, didn't take off for lunch. All I did was sit there and sign my signature. I would have to sign 114 payments every 60 seconds, and that's all I would do. Now, obviously, I don't, because I wouldn't be able to move my hand with writer's cramp. But the point being is, it's a very large state. Fast forward several years, thanks to the men and women of this state, those that want to make Texas what it is, that prior to the pandemic, Texas had led in job creation for 10 years. We had essentially created 25% of the entire jobs in the entire nation. Think about that. 25% of the jobs of the entire country were created in the state that we call home, Texas. Now, there's a reason that every morning when I wake up, I thank God I'm in Texas. I thank God that I'm married to my wonderful wife, Dara, got 3 lovely kids, and I get to do my job here. 2 years ago plus, I was on a phone call with the other 49 treasurers around the nation. Many of them were panicked. They were worried. They didn't know how their state was going to cash flow. Businesses were shut down. They didn't know what was going to happen. Nobody knew what the trajectory of the economy was going to be. My number 2, who's my deputy, has worked for me quite some time. She sent me a quick message. I was at home. I was working, making lunch for my 3 kids because they were at school during that time period at home, of course. And so therefore she texted me. She said, I'm not going to say a word. Now, the reason she said that is because you know why? There was not a panic in our voice because we knew Texas was on a very sound foundation. And as the foundation of any key structure, any key building, as we all know, if it's built on sand, it gets washed away. If it's built on a strong foundation, it will hold up even though you don't know what's on the horizon. And we knew Texas had been built on a very strong foundation because of the men and women and what they were creating in this state. And so it was amazing to compare and contrast. That compare and contrast of where we were in Texas compared to many other states. And so that reminds me once again of why it is great to call this state home. Fast forward to today, you heard in the introduction, Norma mentioned, think about this. Texas has 254 counties, 12 economic regions, is literally now moved from number 12 to number 11 to number 10 to now is the 9th largest economy in the entire world. That is hard to imagine. Now, hopefully, y'all will help me and others. I will serve in a third term. I did not plan to run for a third term, but the legislature, unfortunately, I've got a big stick, and I told them, thank you, I've got enough jobs to do, but they gave me a few more last session. One of those, as you heard, there are 7 million people in this state today that have no internet connectivity, even if they wanted internet connectivity. I don't know about you, but myself, having access, I was actually working on a small little issue right now. I was trying to be inconspicuous. There is a few things going on in this county right now. There's a few commissioner court meetings that you've been to wherever, and yes, back in the back, there you are. And we're trying to work through those, and I'll talk just a couple of comments on those here in a little bit. But we all need to be able to do our jobs, to be able to have telemedicine, to be able to have access to our doctors, to our health care, for kids to be able to have access to education, for many people to have access to attend church. And so therefore we are working to try to figure out with the private sector and work with how do we help ensure 7 million people will be able to have that connectivity if they want it. And I know I've been in several areas as I toured the state of Texas, went around on listening sessions. I remember one lady, I'll have to touch base with her at some point, in Fort Worth, Texas. I say a few words, the gentleman running my office, this broadband development office, said a few words. We sit down because we're there to listen to people. We're not there to talk, we're there to listen. That's what we're there for, to hear what's unique in this community, what's different in this community, how is it different from the community before and the one next. We called on the first lady. She stood up and she goes, oh my goodness, I didn't expect that I was going to get called on today. I didn't come prepared to talk, and I surely didn't expect to be the first speaker. So I have to ask a question. Is today a gripe session? And I pulled my microphone close and I said, well, it sounds like it is now. The reason I figured where she was going with that is, yes, she has internet connectivity, but I imagine like many people in this room, there are a lot of people that, guess what? It's not that very good. And so there's a lot of issues and hurdles that we have, but we're working through those. We're working through a whole list of new things that we've been giving just in the last 2 months here in Harris County. We were given the task last legislative session that if budgets are proposed that are set forth, new adopted budgets that don't fund the police the way they have in the past, law enforcement, whether it's a sheriff department, constable's office, then we are required to inform them and notify them. And guess what? I've always done my job, and I'm going to continue to do my job. Just last week, in addition to that, 2 weeks ago, we were given the task. My office has for quite some time. We keep the list of entities that are pro-Iranian, those that are anti-Israel. We keep several lists that we are in charge of. So when the legislature said, you know what, we are really tired about how certain financial institutions that are publicly traded do not want to do business in the oil and gas sector any longer. And in fact, what I have identified through the process that we have worked for over a year now, until we put this list out just a couple weeks ago, I told my staff it was about this time. Actually, it would be next month because I remember it was getting close. It was in October, and we were having another meeting on this issue of what financial institutions are so-called boycotting the energy industry. And as we were trying to figure out, because there was no process. No one had ever done this. No state had ever done this. And so therefore, sometimes when you go to purchase an item, you purchase something that's what's called, you purchase it off the shelf. You take it off the shelf. You might make a couple of tweaks or changes if it's computer programming or whatever be it, and it can fit your business purpose. But guess what? There was nothing on the shelf. So we had to create an entire process to figure out how do we determine what are those financial institutions. And as we were working on another round of this, I told my staff, I said, what is amazing about this is in part, there's going to be companies that are not on our list, but you know what? There's the big lie. And the big lie is there's all these publications that show that they are boycotting against the oil and gas industry, yet when they come in, they go, well, actually, we're really not. We're just saying these things. We're publishing these things. And in fact, if you look at what we're really doing, we're really supporting that industry. Now, I don't know about you, but that bothers me a lot. It bothers me a lot because one of the points that I have made over and over, if someone wants to drive an electric vehicle, that's fine. We have the opportunity to choose. We have the opportunity as consumers, free choice in this country to choose. But what I do ask for you to remember is that when you get in that car and you sit in the seat, you're sitting on what? A petroleum product. When you touch the door to close it, guess what you're touching? A petroleum product. And then when you move your hands onto the steering wheel, the old 2 and 10 o'clock for safe driving, guess what you're touching? A petroleum product. And oh, by the way, the wires are coated in what? And ironically, of most, the batteries, to help make sure they don't leak if there was something that happened, they're sitting in what? And then, oh, by the way, they have to be charged. And one of my favorite little videos was one of the high-ups in one of the large car companies. They were rolling out their new EV vehicle, and then somebody said, well, where's it charged? And they said, oh, the power plant down the street. And somebody said, well, what kind of electricity comes from that power plant? What is the source of that electricity? So, well, I'm not really sure. You might have to ask Bob or Jill or Jane or whoever it was. And then you see the next clip of the person answering the question. They said, well, actually, it's so-and-so electric, and that's a coal plant around here. Okay, what is the lack of connectivity? And so that's the point that I am trying to make. We published that list a couple weeks ago of financial institutions. And there's another subset of financial institutions that I've made the point that maybe they're not, but the rhetoric is really not quite to par. And I think that people need to be truthful, they need to be honest, and they need to be transparent. And I don't think that that's too much to ask in life, people to actually tell the truth. And so we have worked on several tasks. Let me real quick, and then I'm happy to open it up for questions, talk about one of the main things that I talk about all the time is what's going on in this state economy. The state economy of Texas, people continue to move here. They want to move here. Why? For that economic opportunity that I was talking about earlier. Just to put a couple things in perspective, I was asked this when I was walking in earlier today. So, the state treasury is healthier than it's ever been before. Several different reasons. One, to make a point, we have oil and gas severance taxes in this state. I collect those taxes at the end of what we call a fiscal year, which is the end of August. I start a new fiscal year, a new year, 1 year budget cycle, September 1. We close the books, we make sure all the finances, we know the numbers, and then I send a portion of that money over into what's called the Economic Stabilization Fund or the Rainy Day Fund. That's our state savings account, and it's been there since the late 1980s when we had an oil bust. The revenues into it, ironically, were oil and gas. There wasn't much oil and gas revenue, so there wasn't much money going into it for some time. And then all of a sudden, the world changed. Fracking capabilities, the Permian Basin was active, alive again, as well as several basins in this state, and all of a sudden we started having revenues coming in the Treasury. So in the last year, we've had more in revenues in oil severance tax and natural gas severance taxes, in part because the prices are higher for a variety of reasons, unfortunately, around the world. Normally, I will transfer, when I close the books, about $1.2 to $1.4 billion to our state savings account and an equal amount to fund transportation. Well, let's say Glenn's going to transfer a little bit more this year. That little bit more, try instead of 1.2 to 1.4 billion, it's about 3.6 billion to each. So that savings account now is going to swell to $13.5 billion in it. It is saved for what we call a rainy day, for a downturn in the economy, a natural disaster, unfortunately. Yes, we still live in Katy, west of Houston, which is where my wife grew up. I grew up just north of there, as you call it, Hockley. When I moved from the legislature to the executive branch, when I got into this office, before I got in this office, the state constitution at the time said Glenn Hegar, as a member of the executive branch, shall reside at the Capitol. Now, it didn't really mean live in the Capitol. It meant live in Travis County. So I looked at my wife. We were younger at the time, 3 young children. She works in this area, manages a law firm. Her family's here, my family's here. I said, now we got to make a choice. Do we stay here and Glenn goes back and forth? Do we move to Austin? And my wife, she said, well, let me think about that. That Constitution says that you have to live in Austin, right? That's when I got the hint that Dara Hegar had no desire to move to Travis County. So guess what? We still live in Fort Bend County. Now, Glenn will go to Austin tomorrow via a Republican Ladies Club in Conroe and make my way around and be there for several days the rest of the week. Thank you all for having me here tonight. Because of that, I didn't have to go to Austin today, so I got to work out of Katy. But anyway, the bottom line is, if you look at all the different pieces of the economy overall, it has been healthy in Texas, will continue to be healthy. And just to give you a couple of things. Here in the state, thanks to businesses and consumers, most of the tax that I collect is sales tax. 60% of all my tax collections are sales tax. And another 7 to 8 are automobile sales tax. And so of 1,000 streams of revenue into the state treasury, all of them are important, but that is the one that drives the health of the state treasury. Prior to that thing called COVID, we had a few months where we hit a $3 billion number in a month. $3 billion. We didn't have another one for a while. April of last year, guess what? We hit $3 billion. Then in May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, and we love Christmas. We have 3 kids. My wife and I was married right before Christmas. It's one of our favorite time of the year for many, many reasons. But Christmas comes for most people in December. Well, businesses, you pay taxes, they collect it, they keep it in trust for us, and then they turn it over to Glenn Hegar the following month, starting on the 20th. So actually, my Christmas comes between January the 20th and the end of the month. And let me just say, Christmas for me this year, I don't know what you did, but you felt to be in a very joyful, spirited mood because y'all spent, and I got collected to me, $3.9 billion in sales tax. An absolute record. So I wish you would be moved by the Spirit every month for Glenn Hegar. But the point is this. The Treasury right now is healthier than it's ever been, and that's in part because of the consumers, the businesses that want to be here. People continue to move here. They continue to engage in the economy. The legislature has a lot of tasks, and I have been reminding every single one of them that there is constitutional limitations on how much they can spend. One is how much Glenn Hegar estimates the economy will do, and that's your limitation. But your second limitation, when the economy is so strong, is what's called a constitutional spending limit. And that means even if there's so much money that comes in, guess what? You can't spend it all. And I have been reminding them over and over again that thankfully, unlike Washington, D.C., unlike other states, we have a spending limit here, and that you just can't go spend it all because you are supposed to make sure that you have it prudently saved for rainy days. So the point, if nothing else you take away, the economy's been good, businesses have been good. Yes, there are some drags on this economy. Unfortunately, there's labor shortages, there's inflationary pressures that we're all paying. There's, in fact, supply chains that we're all dealing with. But in fact, we think Texas is on a path to continue to be a very healthy state. Last thing I'll mention, just because I know I've been asked by several of you, what is really going on? What's going on here in Harris County? And bear in mind, I'm only saying because I've been asked. I have not had one press statement. I have not spoke on talk shows. I have not spoke in front of the radio. I have not been on TV. I have not issued press releases. I sent a letter to the county. Then subsequently, I was asked a question 2 days later at a conference that I was attending, which someone with Commissioner's Court admitted to me that they had set this person up to ask me a question on the issue, even though that person was a county commissioner in El Paso. So I answered that question, and then I've sent a follow-up letter to Commissioner's Court. Now, what's going on is last legislative session, I was tasked again with a new responsibility. That new responsibility is that if there is a complaint sent to the governor's office and then forwarded to me, about defunding the police, limiting the amount of money going to law enforcement, then we will investigate it. We will make a determination, and then we will notify you. Now, I think personally, it is prudent to let you know in advance, as far in advance as you can, that there might be a problem. I think that's good government. I think it's transparent. I think it's openness. Same as any time. People need to be informed. I don't believe in gotchas. I don't believe in catches. I believe in open transparency. And as soon as I see something, I'm going to let you know. So, what we sent is 3 things. 1, you decided before the law was taken into effect that you were going to stop what's called rollovers, dollars that were not spent, to a new budget cycle. Yes, that was decided before the law took effect. But number 2, looking at the math, and what's complicated is this is a 7-month budget cycle that the county is finishing compared to a normal 12-month because they are realigning the start date of their fiscal year to match up with the federal fiscal year. So you can't compare 12 to 12. You actually got to do some assumptions and numbers, and do you look at month to month, 7 months divided by times equals 12, or do you do payroll periods? There's a couple ways to look at the math. So therefore, we analyzed it. We made a determination that the constable's office was not getting the same funding under the proposed budget than what they had before. So there's also some complicating factors because of the way the budgeting cycle is done to actually have knowledge of how much you have to spend and when you can spend it. So those are the 3 factors that we notified. And if you move forward with this, there is probably going to be complications, unfortunately. So we give you notice in advance. We let you know. Also, if you do the proposed budget as it is today, you probably need to ask voter approval per the law. But guess what? Time has moved forward, and there's not an ability to go get voter approval. So now the question becomes, and we had a temporary restraining order attempted on us today, that I wouldn't speak on this anymore, that Glenn Hegar, you're in the wrong. There's been lots of accusations. Glenn Hegar can't add. Like hell I can't add. I might be an Aggie, but I do know 1 + 1 is 2. 2 + 2 is 4. And I can tell you what, as a whole big old state agency of your taxpayer employees, I trust you. My people can add and subtract. We're real good at what we do. And the math adds up. Now, I've avoided over and over and over again to speak on the issue because I'm trying to let a process work. There was negotiations going on between the county, constable's offices. There was actually an agreement a week ago last Friday. The county budgeting people were openly communicating with us. They sent us a letter and said, we need you to retract your letter so we can move forward. And we said, actually, the ball's in your court. I sent a subsequent letter. The ball's in your court. Actually, the only one that can make this go forward is you. And in fact, you've been negotiating. Thank you for that. You've been transparent and open with us and communicating. We appreciate that. And then guess what? Around that time, there's been no more discussions. Reach out to us. My staff reaches out, says, oh, by the way, I'm in my office except this one period. I'm going to a lunch, and guess when we got the call? Ironic timing. So now we're moving forward with a temporary restraining order. The judge in Travis County said, you know what? Y'all need to figure this out. I'm not issuing a restraining order today. By the way, county, can you explain to us with your $700 an hour lawyers that you've now hired at taxpayer expense? Actually, the judge didn't say that. That's Glenn Hegar. But when asked, so what has he done that can't allow you to adopt a budget? If you can't figure out, there was nothing said. Because the fact is, they can adopt a budget, but then it's going to create all these other consequences, because if you adopt it as the way you laid it out, guess what? You're in violation of the law that was passed last session by the legislature. So they couldn't answer that question. So here's where we're at. I decided not to make a statement this afternoon. I decided to try to allow the process to work and hopefully find a reasonable solution to what we have identified. But instead, I apologize. I was sitting here on my phone because, yes, God works in mysterious ways, and one of those mysterious ways is Glenn had to work right here. So you didn't know that actually today this was part of my mobile office because I was working on this issue and trying to decide, do I want to make a statement or not, because some of the rhetoric that is coming out is absolutely nothing short of a word called absurd. It's twisted, it's not right, it's not transparent, but you know what? I have told my 3 kids since they were very little, you open, deal with honesty, you're transparent. I tell you, when I ran for this job, I will never forget the very first debate we had up in Northeast Texas. It was cold, it was snowing. Literally, when we left Dallas to drive that way, I had to pour coffee cups to go get the windshield where I could scrape the ice off of it. I laughed because my little guy that was driving me, poor kid, he tried to open the trunk. You can't open the trunk when it's frozen, buddy. We got almost to Tyler, and guess what? The trunk flew open. True story, not making it up. He looked at me, what do we do? And I said, you slowly pull over to the side of the road so we can close the trunk. So we slowly made it over there. There wasn't hardly anybody there, but you know, the fact is we were there. It was one of the very first debates. I'll never forget. We were asked the question, and I went 4th out of the 4. Tell us what qualifies you to be controller of public accounts of the great state of Texas. 1 got up, answered. Number 2 got up. Number 3 got up. Glenn Hegar got up. And I said one word. One word. And that one word is something that I learned on that family farm. I watched my grandfather make deals with a handshake and his word. Now I'm a lawyer by a reason because not everybody agrees to that style. But the fact is, I watched him make a handshake and deals. His word was his bond. That's how I was raised. And you know what that one word was? It's called character. Character. And I'm going to tell you, it was amazing because after that debate, all 3 of my opponents always spoke about what? Character. Well, my character is I know where we're at on the law, and I've not had to make political statements, and I've been avoiding because I want the right thing to be done. I want to make sure that our communities are safe, we are protected, and Texas does not move in the direction that we have seen in other states when what happens when we make sure that our police departments, our law enforcement officers are not supported. No different than we were talking earlier. Somebody had mentioned their spouse is a teacher, and I thought, bless their heart because they must be a saint because I couldn't do it. You know, Carrie, we were talking about how I couldn't do it. We have to support the people that are educating our youthful and are protecting our communities. So that's just a short of what's going on. I still am hopeful that it'll be resolved, but it seems like from some statements going on right now, I'm not so convinced. But the fact is, I'm going to remain hopeful. I'm going to think the right thing is going to happen. And no matter what, we're going to continue to be open, we're going to be honest, and we're going to be transparent. And we're going to continue to make sure the public is educated. So with that, I will stop. Questions, comments, complaints? What do y'all have for me? Yes, ma'am.
But the rainy day fund.
Yes.
We can take from the rainy day fund to protect Texans when an emergency arises, like the invasion at the border. Could we take from the rainy day fund to further secure our border? Because it is an invasion.
So we can take rainy day fund. Well, let me say it this way. The rainy day fund was intended and originally created for an economic downturn. That was what it was created for. When there's a downturn in the economy, you cut expenses, you tighten your belt, but also you try to smooth out the rough edges. Same reason as you and I have a savings account. But then also what the legislature has done, as I said kind of earlier, mentioned with Hurricane Harvey, take money out for natural disasters, take money out for one-time expenses, one-type things that we're not going to repeat again. It takes a 2/3 vote in the House and the Senate, so it has to be 2/3, 100 out of 150 in the Texas House, 21 out of 31 in the state Senate, because the point is it's a higher threshold than just the average state budget, which is just 1/50. And so, yes, they can take money out for any purpose. There was an article written today in part saying, well, Glenn Hegar, he's talked about the border. Well, number one, I'm responsible for paying all the money. Number two, my family has a hunting ranch in a county called Maverick County. And oh, by the way, we're probably about 14 miles from, I don't know, have y'all seen a town that's been in the news a lot called Eagle Pass?
I know that too.
So October of last year, the first time, my son and I turned a corner, and he goes, who are those two people walking down? And I had to explain about illegal immigration that night to my 12-year-old son. Fast forward, I will tell you, when I'm out there, I will tell you a true story that was last year. We turned a corner, two guys jumped up and ran off in the brush. I got up and I closed the deer stand and I kind of looked around, and then when I got back to the pickup, I honestly put my pistol on my side. And I didn't think when I jumped out. And my son, true story last year, and he looked at me square in the eye and he said, I bet you won't take that off the next time we're here, rest of the time we're here. And that's something from a 13-year-old kid. We opened a deer stand last year. I said a few words I won't repeat here tonight. Because why? It was occupied at 6 in the morning. I mean, we see people all the time. Our house has been broke into. Border Patrol had to kick the door in a few weeks ago because people had locked themselves inside of it. I mean, landowners are fed up with this.
But they're still coming. It's still happening.
They're coming in. They're coming in.
And we're not building a wall. That's a fence. I've seen it. It's a fence.
There is a fence. There is walls in places. There's fence in others. Same thing as you and I as landowners. There's landowner issues, right, wrong, or indifferent. Landowner may not want it, so you need to get permission, or then you have to use condemnation powers. I mean, I'm just making the point, honestly, it's complicated. It's difficult. Yeah, especially with what we're having today. But I will say that while I'm out there, I mean, I just went this last weekend for a quick day trip with my son. DPS, they're everywhere. That's not what they signed up to do. So the point is the state is putting a lot of resources into this, but there are so many people. And the fact is, I feel sorry for our Border Patrol. We were out there 2 to 3 trips ago. I was driving and I looked to my left and I saw 2 guys and I slammed on my brakes to try to identify who is that, what is that, and it was 2 Border Patrol agents. True story. They came walking up to us and I said, how are you? Glenn Hegar, it's my son. Thank you for being here. Thank you. And they said, well, have you seen the group? There's a group coming through here and we are chasing them. And I said, well, they're headed probably directly this direction. If you go right in this path here, you're going to go to what we call Camp Biden. Because I will tell you, it's an area about as big as this and it's just nothing but trash. If you continue across the ranch to close to the highway, which is probably where they're going, we call that Camp Harris. Because again, equal amount of trash and destruction. I mean, it is absolutely ridiculous. And this is what one of them looked at. I said, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for your service. You're not appreciated to what you should be. And one of them, I asked, both of them have been serving, I think, 13 years, they told me. And one of them looked at me and he said, well, I appreciate you saying that because not a lot of people think that way these days. Can you imagine getting up and going to work like that every day? So my point is this, they don't get the support from what they need.
But do you publicly call it an invasion? And does the governor publicly call it an invasion? Because I've really never heard that.
I don't know what the governor has said, to tell you. I don't know, so I don't want to misquote the governor at all. I think it depends on what your definition, again, sorry for the lawyer education in me, but words matter, and devil's in the details. It depends on your definition of an invasion. And my point is, in my interpretation, I see an invasion of what Russia's doing to Ukraine is an attempt to take over and occupy someone else's territory. These people, they are coming to this country, but they're not trying to occupy my property, but they damn sure are destroying part of it when they go through it. And so it is a destruction of property. It's, I get amazed at some folks. They go, oh, well, they're harmless. Well, hell, let them go through your yard. Let them go into your house. I mean, the fact is, obviously they're not welcome. Let me say it that way. But I do think, again, it depends on kind of your way. I mean, I saved that invasion, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, so I'm not trying to be coy. I'm just trying to make a point. I see the invasion of, like Russia trying to go into Ukraine and literally taking over and killing people's lives and recklessly not caring human life. Now, there are some people that are bad people. Ma'am? Yeah. Thank you. Questions? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, Glenn. One of the questions, we'll switch to big gears here, but one of the questions I have is on recapture, the Robin Hood.
Yeah.
Okay, the money is collected from the school districts, about 160 or so across the state, but then the money just goes, if I understand it right, the money just goes into the general fund, so there isn't a separate accounting of the revenue of recapture and the expenditures of just recapture. Is that something that you're looking at? Is that something we should try to do as far as creating more transparency?
Yeah, so I would say this. It's very similar to oil and gas severance taxes in one point, from an accounting perspective, and some numbers as you were asking. Dollars, come in the Treasury. We have all these accounts. We can track it. We count for it. Sorry, I was chewing a mint because I was kind of get thirsty after a while. And my kids asked me how many you eat of these, and I eat a whole pile of them. I'm like addicted to life-saving mints. But anyway, so money comes in, same as with the oil and gas severance tax. The first $600 million of each are dedicated to public education, and then above 25% is. And so it comes in the Treasury. We know how much there is. And so it's the same thing as the lottery. When you go buy a lottery ticket, a third of it goes to public education. And so it's all supposed to go, but part of it goes to the lottery winners and this and this. And so we know how much there is. And whether you say that bucket is spent somewhere else or over here, that is what is accounted for. You know how much you're spending in public education. It's going there. Same thing as a few years ago when there was a property tax reduction occurred in the 2004 or 5 legislative session. Rates were compressed by about a third. There was a separate fund that was created for property tax relief, and essentially it's a portion of the franchise tax. It's accounted, it goes to that. So my point is, it's not just one bucket that says education, but there are a lot of buckets, and we can account for it and how much truly goes in. It is earmarked and goes to public education. Well, we can account for it and show you where it goes. Yes. Oh, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
I was watching Commissioner's Court last week, and it's always painful to watch.
Yes.
But they were talking about the $725 million that the federal government is going to be giving the state of Texas for flood mitigation, and a big long discussion is how's Harris County going to get a portion of that money. Are you involved in determining what portion of that money will come to Harris County?
Great question. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. No, I am not. Those dollars flow through the General Land Office. And so it's the General Land Office that's deciding. There's a couple of different tranches of money and how that money is being allocated across the state of Texas. So we account for it. We know when it comes in because we collect the money, we put it in the accounts, but the decisions upon how that money is spent across the state of Texas and who qualifies is through the General Land Office. Yeah, thank you for that. Other questions? Or he's got the mic.
George Brian Vacris. I am running for state senate and hope to support you if I am successful.
Good luck. Yes, sir.
Question is this. By far the largest expenditure in the state budget is public health and welfare.
Yes, sir.
And to what extent does that come with federal strings and mandates attached?
So 2 biggest portions of your state budget are, one, as you said, health and human services, and also public education. Those 2 are both about 37% of the state budget, the biggest portion. The biggest portion of the healthcare budget is Medicaid. There's Medicare, Medicaid, those that are 65 and older. Then there are those that are an income level and below. It's the income level and below portion that's the biggest piece. That is typically a 75% federal money. The rest is state money, you and I taxpayers on that side. There are several different programs, and they do have specific requirements that the feds require those dollars to be expended upon. And so, yes, there are strings and requirements and parameters. Most of those programs, the states can tailor it to some flexibility and degree. We have always tried to make sure we have the maximum capability and flexibility because obviously Texas is different than other states. But yes, there are some requirements that come along on those dollars. That's correct. Yes, sir.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am. Oh, there we
Okay.
are. I just see
Yeah,
hands
no,
and I
you're
heard
good, you're good.
voices.
Okay, so the first time I heard about that accessibility was in the Senate Finance Committee meeting, and I was actually there whenever you were talking about it. So my concern is this, or my question is this: moving connectability or accessibility to connectivity from corporate to government, what protections are there to where access isn't going to be tied to compliance, like with vaccines and all that crazy stuff? You know what I'm talking about?
So which program? At
Connect-
first, I thought maybe you were talking about going
I'm
to
sorry.
broadband. No, that's okay.
Yes, that's what I'm talking
Oh, in the
about.
broadband.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
okay. So essentially this. So we as federal taxpayers, there's been $500 million that has come to the state of Texas for broadband internet connectivity. And so that money has been allocated to my office. Texas never had some office. I mean, the bottom line is we use the roads all the time. We couldn't envision a life without paved roads. I think we're getting to the point to where we can't envision life without access to be able to communicate in some form or fashion, and that up speed and download speed. And I'm not talking about entertainment. I'm talking about literally jobs, healthcare, telemedicine, education opportunities, church opportunities. And so therefore, now how does the state help play a role in making sure those vendors in the private sector, who are the ones building the networks and the ones that should be built? We as the state, my office, we are not going to get in the business of building infrastructure across the state. That's not what we do. But I have been given a pot of money that we as the taxpayers, so I'm entrusted with our tax dollars. And then the federal infrastructure bill that was passed by Congress last year, we don't know how much money Texas will get out of that portion. The FCC is mapping, we are mapping, because we're going to map down to the actual zip code of where you live. Do you have internet? Do you not have internet? Our maps will be much more clear and transparent, kind of like I explained, like a cone of certainty with a hurricane. When it's far out in the Gulf, it says it's going to hit somewhere in Texas. Well, thanks for that report. And then as it gets closer, and so we're trying to refine down to that clarity is the point. So then we can make sure we're prudently spending those dollars. That infrastructure bill will probably be somewhere between an additional $1 to $4 billion coming to Texas. So we're in charge, and I take this job very seriously because it is a lot of money. And so to answer your question, we are standing up very lean operation with limited staff, standing up an entire process that we have never replicated. No other state has done this. We've had some concerns with the feds because in the $1 to $4 billion portion we're going to get, which we don't know until they map, and we won't know till the beginning of next year. I assume it's bigger than smaller because we're big, we're rural, we got a large land mass, but we don't know. One of the things the feds said, well, you know what? We think you should all have fiber. Well, I think we should all have fiber too. But when you have 50 states and territories trying to do the same thing at one time, and then you have supply chain issues, I don't know about you, reason tells me it's probably going to cost more. So we need to have all modes of communication capabilities to do this. We need to have flexibility is what we need. And having a statement that says satellite coverage, satellite internet is the same as no internet. And I said, whoa, have you been to West Texas? We will spend all this money, same as when I was on an AARP call one time, and one of the ladies said, I have a question, Mr. Hegar. And I said, yes, ma'am. She said, are you focused on quantity or quality? That's a great question. Because if it's all fiber, it's all quality. Guess what? There's no quantity. Well, we're trying to get to 7 million people, the quantity, that you can have connectivity. So it's a little of both is my point, and we need to have flexibility and not be dictated it has to be Texas is like Delaware. We're not Delaware, okay? I mean, hell, I drove across Delaware just to get here, essentially, from Katy. I'm over-exaggerating, but you get my point. It's like I covered the whole state. That's how small it is. You can't treat us the same. And so we are setting up a program where we are going to work with the vendors. Everybody is going to be competitive. They're going to tell us where they're providing service. You two will bid. If you have conflicting area, we're going to have a process to where we get one of you to cover it. And so we're going to work with the private sector. The private sector is going to do the jobs. They're going to do the implementation. They're going to do the process. But there are a lot of hurdles that was put in the federal legislation that more so at the agency level because of all these hurdles. And, you know, there's some of the smaller vendors that goes, I can't compete because I can't adhere to all these. And to me, that's absurd because, you know, think about this. Do you know who the majority of the job creators are? They're small business. And that's who we need to help incentivize because they need that more than everybody else. So that's who's going to be doing the work. So that's a longer answer to your question, but it gives a little more scope to what we're working on. Other questions? The man with the mic. Yes, sir.
It was mentioned earlier that the economy of Texas is ranked 9th from a global perspective.
Yes, sir.
How is that measured?
So that is actually GDP, economic output for the state of Texas. We're about a $1.8 trillion economy, and we're growing constantly as a state. So I expect probably in the next few years we'll move up to be number 8. Other questions, comments? And then Gail has one on the front.
Okay, so my husband was the Aggie accounting major. I was a psychology major, so I need the answer to be able to be understood by a psychology major. So what was the state law that triggered this letter to the Harris County Commissioners Court? And best I can understand, they have to significantly reduce their budget because they don't have time to get a vote on it. And how does that work? And I understand the deadline normally is next Tuesday at that meeting.
So Senate Bill 23 of last legislative session by Senator Joan Huffman, and then by Representative Tom Oliverson and Representative Harless, who were joint authors, and many other members obviously voted and supported it, but that was the legislation. And so the timing of what the county's trying to argue is, you can't look at anything until we adopt our budget. Well, that kind of seems silly because I get a complaint, I'm going to look into it, I'm going to investigate it, and I do think if there's an issue, I ought to tell you sooner than later. I think most people would complain that if I just sat and just kind of wait and then wait till later on and then spring it on you, that's not open. That's not transparent. When we identify something, we need to notify you. The earlier, the better. That's how you solve problems. The earlier, the better. So we went ahead and notified. And the fact is that under the law, if you are reducing, one, they're denying. They're saying my math doesn't add up. Again, my math does, which, you know, you said, did you say psychology? Well, that reminds me, sorry, I have to tell y'all a joke real quick. So there was a business owner a few years ago that wanted to create a new business and couldn't decide what profession they wanted to lead this business. So they had it wide open. There was somebody who was in psychology that came, sat down, told him a few things, and then they were asking questions of the individual, and that person looked at the business owner and said, well, I have a question for you. Yes, what is that? Said, how's your relationship with your mom? So then we move on to the next one. It was a lawyer, and the lawyer then eventually said, well, let me tell you about, because they were asking the question, what's 2 + 2? That was the question. And so then the lawyer said, well, there was this U.S. Supreme Court case way back when, and it set a precedent on what's 2 + 2, and then the next person. Then came an accountant. The accountant CPA came in, sat down, was asked, what's 2 + 2? The accountant got up and just started walking out the door. Well, what in the world's going on? The accountant actually grabbed the door, closed the door, came back over and said, what do you want it to be? I don't hire those accountants, okay? 2 + 2 is 4. So the fact is, what's supposed to happen, we notify, either you correct the issue or then you have to go to a voter approval. And that's where the reduction occurs. Now, the timeline for that has passed, because time has gone by. And again, as I mentioned, based on information that we've been told by all the parties, there was an agreement. There was an agreement between staff and the offices. There was one. And then all of a sudden it was abruptly stopped. So now fast forward, timeline is you can't actually be able to go for voter approval So then the only question is now, do we adopt the budget or do we not? And so the whole legal argument attempting to be made, one, Glenn's office can't add. Number two, he doesn't have standing to send us this letter because we haven't adopted the budget. You can't do it until you adopt the budget. Well, that's just silly. That's just silly. And then moving forward, the problem is when you adopt the budget and the budget has the problems we've identified, if they're not corrected, but if they're corrected, we move on. But if they're not corrected, then guess what? I'm probably going to get another complaint. I'm going to do the math again, and the math's going to come back out. And then I'm going to notify there's a problem. And then it gets real messy. Because then there's going to be a prolonged legal battle, and I guess the lawyers that are making $700 an hour are happy, they're excited. I can't blame them. But people here are going to be paying for it. And the fact moving forward is then it gets really complicated going forward depending on what the court's going to decide. And so I just think just solve it on the front end and be done with it. But that's not where we're at today, unfortunately. Yes, ma'am.
We're going to have a lot of money, unexpected money in the...
Correct.
And the governor has stated that he wants to use some of it, half of it, to buy down property taxes,
Right.
as I understand it.
I saw that.
How do you come up with, I want to take half of it, why not all of it, and what are we going to do with the rest of it?
Well, those are great questions, and I can tell you, yes, ma'am. Please do. Add an addendum to the question.
I was going to ask about the property taxes and if you influence that, because recently someone asked to compare California and Texas, and Texas taxes are higher than California. I was surprised to learn. And not only that, the breakdown was by different categories, like the wealthy citizens in California, the percent of either what they get or don't get is 6%. In Texas, the wealthy is 1%. In other words, our rich people are getting richer than California's rich people. And it's seemed very inequitable.
So let me answer that one first. First, I haven't seen what you're citing, so I'm not really sure. But I do think, just to answer one point, to me, the fact that so many of the rich people from California are moving, to Texas, I think would probably be because they're leaving a state that is overburdensome and is very problematic. Probably not. My guess, I don't know for sure, is a tax rate is just the way people are treated in doing business in that state. However, the way California taxes is they have an income tax. Most of that income tax, as in the wealthier, typically that's on capital gains. And so therefore, it depends on the year of the analysis, because my point is, a year like this one, when the market's way down, there's no capital gains. And so therefore, I'd have to see what years are being compared, because if you compared it to a year like this, yes, you still pay sales tax, because it's a fixed amount. But the reality is, when you pay income on capital gains, then there's no capital gains because the market's down. So I'd have to see exactly, how they mix those numbers. I would also tend to guess that depends on pure taxes or fees. I don't know about you, but you can call a fee instead of a tax, but it still comes out of my pocket. I still have to open my billfold, or you have to open your purse. That's still money out of our pocket. And so therefore, California has a lot of those in place. So I would tend to think, really Californians do pay more than what we pay in Texas overall.
I think we're like 35th most expensive property taxes in the nation.
Yes, we have higher property taxes than other states, a lot of other states. That is correct. There is no doubt about that whatsoever, which is why we have continued to talk about property taxes. And the fact is, we talk about how we're a private property owned state. 94% of our state is privately property owned, but when you still got to pay property taxes, you got to ask the question, do we really own private property? So they don't have that same level, but they have an income tax and we don't, and so I'm just making the point, they have other taxes there. So I'd have to see the report. But to answer your question, I don't know how the governor came up with the half the number. I haven't talked to the governor about it. I've seen the statements. And so therefore, really, we'll just have to see what the legislature does next legislative session. As I said earlier, they can't spend all that money because there's a constitutional spending limit. And so therefore, they can't spend it all even if they wanted to because the Constitution doesn't allow them to. However, how would they provide property tax releases? My guess is probably the typical easiest, best way. One, people ask me, Glenn, how many in property taxes do you collect? We collect zero. The state has a prohibition against property tax. We don't collect any property taxes whatsoever. And so therefore, that is all local governments. And typically of local governments, which one do you pay the most to? If you live in a city, roughly 50% is to your school districts. If you live in a rural area, you don't live in a city, then guess what? About 2/3. And so the easiest way for the state to adjust and lower property taxes is in school finance formulas. And that's why that's typically been done in the past. When Mark was asking the question earlier, and I referenced not just the questions he was asking with Robin Hood, but the one time that it was suppressed, the rates were decreased by 1/3. That was back in 2004 or 5 through the property tax system, because that's the easiest way you can impact people's overall property tax bill is through the school finance system. So that's how my guess would be that's what they're going to do, but I'm not really sure. There are others that says, you know what we ought to do is just issue everybody a check. That has happened in the past. We did that. George Bush was governor. Everybody got a check. Now, whether we do that, I don't know. So there's multiple ways they can do it to answer your question. How they come up and which exact number they come up with, I'd love to tell you I know today. But it's kind of like earlier when Norma said, why this day? We don't really know, but we'll know here in a few more months when they get into session. But I do think there is a significant effort to deal with property taxes again. There really is, yes. Other questions, comments, complaints? I know most people are falling asleep. I get it. I don't take offense that you seem a little tired, you seem a little exhausted. That's because the Mexican food has kicked in. And to tell you the truth, you know what? I was speaking, but I almost fell asleep 2 or 3 times myself, so I don't take offense. So it's good to see y'all, good to be with you. God bless you, and thank you for letting me be here.
Thank you, Glenn. And it seems like everybody has a story to tell about what the county commissioners, the Democrat ones, have to say about crime. And do y'all remember what Cactus Cagle said? That Lena Hidalgo said, we need more trees in the state parks for the criminals to hide behind. That was last month, he said that. And it may not be too far from true. We have another speaker. Yeah. I think Kyle Scott is here, and he is our candidate for county treasurer, so we're going to hear some more about what he's going to do to protect and enrich the county for us and keep our taxes low. And Kyle, I'm going to let you tell a little bit as a candidate about how you're qualified to be candidate. Sure. Because it's a great story. Thank you.
We all set? That one's intimidating. All right, so I do have to say, if there's a math dispute between the Texas Comptroller and Harris County, chances are the Comptroller did not make it. I was before Commissioner's Court about 3 months ago, and Kim Ogg was there asking for another $6 million to hire more prosecutors. So you had all five members of Commissioner's Court. You had Kim Ogg, her CFO. You also had the budget administrator and the county administrator. 9 people with direct access to the budget. No 2 of them could agree how much money the DA had in her budget. So the question is, if the people in charge of your money don't know where your money is, what hope is there for the rest of us? So, one of the things I'm running on is, as we've heard it before, is transparency. Because in order to go through our budget documents, in order to submit the necessary FOIAs to gain access to those things, you either have to be crazy or run for county treasurer, because nobody has time to go through this stuff. And it's my standing that in order to have accountability, in order to bring accountability to our government, we must have transparency. Because without it, all of us are lost, and we are left with what we've seen in the past few weeks, which is each side going a bit like that. So really, running around the county in a countywide race, I don't know how you do statewide anyway. I started out this morning at Wayside and I-10, made my way to Midtown, ended up in Pasadena, and now I'm in my backyard. But no matter where I go in the county, the issues come down to three: crime, corruption, and infrastructure. It doesn't matter if there's Democrats or Republicans in the room. It doesn't matter if I'm knocking on a Democrat door, independent door, or Republican door. Those all come down to the three primary issues. My contention is we cannot fix infrastructure and crime until we get our money right. And right now, we live in a county that in the past 4 years has increased its budget by more than 40%. We've received $1.4 million, excuse me, I almost had a moment of sanity there, but then again, I'm talking about the government. $1.4 billion in federal aid. We spent our reserve fund down from $313 million to $4 million. This year alone, between these 2 years, we're stated to get a 12.1% more revenue from one year to the next. The question is, where's the money gone? Because our streets are no safer and our homes are no safer from crime or flooding. So let me give you a few examples. Under the umbrella of justice and safety, which they've deemed law enforcement, we've acquired $472,000 worth of solar-powered lights. We've decided to increase the public defender's budget by 217%. We created an elections administrator office, two responsibilities that used to be controlled by the tax assessor collector and the county clerk. Her office, well now his office, has a budget of $13.4 million. We saw no corresponding decrease in the tax assessor collector or the county clerk's office, which would have explained the shift in funding. We have a county administrator now whose office has a budget of $23 million. Similarly, we saw no corresponding decrease in any of the other budgets. It gets worse. No. So the cost of elections in the 2018 primaries, the last time we had midterm primaries, it cost us $1.48 per voter. This primary in 2022 cost us $5.48 per voter, a 372% increase in the cost of each person voting. So the question is not, well, where's the money gone? We know where it's going. It's leaking out to waste and it's leaking out to corruption. So instead of fighting crime, we've spent $250,000 for a law enforcement czar instead of putting more boots on the ground. We spent $1.5 million on Wi-Fi under the umbrella of justice and safety. And it comes down to this. Why are these things happening? It's because the majority on Commissioner's Court do not represent the values of life, liberty, and property. When they spend $7 million to PFM Consulting to study law enforcement, instead of spending it on prosecutors to prosecute criminals, we know what their values are. When they take $48 million from the toll roads and allocate it to hike and bike trails instead of flood mitigation, we know what their values are. When they defund our constables by taking our rollover funds, but the commissioners and the county judge get to keep theirs. Rodney Ellis kept $34 million in rollover funds. We know their values because budgets reflect values. And I'm running for Harris County Treasurer in order to make sure that our values, the right values of life, liberty, property, fiscal responsibility, bringing about transparency, accountability, and integrity, are represented in that office. So like Ms. Norma asked, well, what qualifies me? Well, I can count to 20 without taking my shoes and socks off, so I consider that an accomplishment. My son may disagree. I don't know if you guys saw him here, but he jet as soon as I got here, so I'm not sure what that says. But it takes somebody who's not afraid to stand up to power. Because whether we have a 3-2 commissioner's court one way or the other, it's going to take a treasurer to stand up to bring that transparency to the fore and call anybody out on where the money's going. So when I was a teacher, my first university teaching job was at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. So Miami not in Florida, Oxford not in England. I was the pre-law advisor there. And so we had a Supreme Court justice come. And they said, well, you're the pre-law advisor. You want to bring your con law class? Yeah, absolutely. So Eric Bapes, and keep in mind, the Supreme Court justice held up her copy of the Pocket Constitution. Says, I carry it with me everywhere I go. And Eric Bapes, now my favorite student, says, well, Justice O'Connor, could you define liberty for us? And she responded, my job is to interpret the Constitution. The word liberty doesn't appear in the Constitution, so I don't have a definition. To which I stood up and I said, Justice O'Connor, the word liberty is the 35th word in the preamble, so do you just carry that thing around or do you read it? At which point I was escorted out the door. But really what it comes down to is this. Government ought to be about public service. When I talk about public service, that means empowering communities and the individuals within it. And government ought to be about that. The government's about, particularly at the county level, is about overcoming problems of collective action. When individuals and voluntary associations can't solve a problem that actually needs to be solved, the government steps up, assists with the solution, and then steps out of the way so the free market can take over. I take this position of public service because at critical junctures of my life, there were people who were themselves public servants who were put into my life. Teachers. So it was Melvin Hinich at the University of Texas who, after teaching me econometrics and game theory, ran me through Friedman and Buchanan and Hayek and Mises and these conservative economic thinkers. It was Ross Lentz at the University of Houston when I was getting my PhD in political science who brought me to Christ at the age of 27. It was Barb Ostadek when I was getting my MBA at Rice University who helped steer me through my wife's cancer diagnosis. But it started in high school. I was an awful high school student. You know, when you leave home at 15, there's not much hope for you. And by the time I got to my senior year, I was a lost cause. And Miss Sartori kicked me out of class, which wasn't uncommon. She said, boy, just get out of my class and don't come back until next week when you have a book report for me. So that's what I did. I went to the Harris County Public Library, now the Barbara Bush Library at the corner of Cypress Wood and Student Airline, and I found the most objectionable book imaginable, The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test by Thomas Wolfe. Now, I had no idea that Thomas Wolfe had written Bonfire of the Vanities and The Right Stuff, had won Pulitzer Prizes. I just saw the word acid, and I was like, she's going to hate this. So I got the book, I wrote the book report, I brought it into her class, or after school. She read it, and she said, don't show up to another class, but show up each week with a book report, and I'll get you into college. And that's what she did. Because of these teachers, because of these public servants who put me on the path to stand before you here tonight, say, put me into service as your next Harris County Treasurer. Thank you very much.
Wow. Okay, and I would just add a little something because as Kyle did a really good summary of what was going on with the budget, I would just call your attention when he said, I believe he said a 217% increase in public defender. Those are the lawyers that represent the criminals against the prosecutors. So, that's just a little aside. Anyway, thank you for coming. We look forward to seeing you next time. Contact our treasurer. I think she had to slip out. Contact our treasurer to join. We want you to be a part of our family. We can't wait to see you again. And we have work to do. And we're going to have a great Christmas party. Good night.